Hi, I'm Norm Robbins, and I'm here with Maestro Carthy, who will be conducting the Reno Chamber Orchestra, January 25th and 26th, Saturday and Sunday. And welcome to Reno, Maestro.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you here. Tell us a little bit about yourself. You obviously have a British accent.
I do, yes.
Where were you born, sir?
I was born in Bedford, about an hour north of London, and I studied there, and then I went on to study in Salzburg. I won a piano scholarship to study there. And then I really I didn't leave Europe after that for years and years and years and years. And then about 15 years ago, they offered me the job of music director of the opera program in the University of Colorado, Boulder, where I've been ever since.
Okay, so you're now a man of the West.
I am a man of the West,
and
indeed.
You conducted in Switzerland.
Yes.
You conducted in Austria.
Yep.
Tell us about the scholarship that you had to the Mozarteum.
That's right. Yeah. So I, after I finished my studies in London, I was looking for to do postgrad things, and I found a teacher in Salzburg. So I caught the night train down to go and play for him, and he looked at me and he said, "Why is it you want to play for me? Why is it you want to study with me?" And I thought, okay, that's it. Back I go to London. And then he wrote me the most fantastic recommendation. And so I went to study in Salzburg. And the first thing that occurred to me when I got there was this amazing disparity between the philosophies, if you like, of the sort of Central European way of educating musicians and the London way of educating musicians.
Okay.
They were all the pianists there were told that they would be great pianists and they would be playing Beethoven sonata recitals and playing in Carnegie Hall and things like that. And my piano professor in London used to say to me, "Well, if you can sight read, you won't starve." And so I became known in Salzburg as the person who could sight read, which was great because even though nobody was ever going to invite me to play evenings of Beethoven sonatas, if somebody wanted somebody at short notice to do something, that's when they came to me, which is how I got to play for Karajan and for Haitink and for Barenboim and Bernstein and Ozawa and all the greats who came in the summer for the Salzburg festival, because for 10 months of the year, Salzburg was a sleepy little
salt mining
Sound of Music city.
Salt mining town.
That's right. And
City, Salzburg.
two months of the year, everybody came to Salzburg.
Good. Then you conducted in Switzerland.
I was at the Orchestra della Svizzera Italiana for 3 years in Lugano. Yeah.
Was there a language problem conducting?
No, not really. I could already speak German and I can speak Italian, so that wasn't a problem. I mean, if you conduct opera, I think you have to be able to really speak German and Italian.
Let's talk about what you will be conducting, and let's start with Robert Schumann's Prelude,
Overture, Scherzo, Finale.
And Finale. And I couldn't find anything to be an overture to or a finale of. It just went by so quickly.
It's not an overture to anything, nor is it a finale of anything. It's just a name for a symphony without a slow movement, really.
Okay.
And it came at the point when Schumann realized that writing music criticism wasn't actually going to pay the rent.
Yes.
And that he actually had to compose to make money. His hand was already damaged. He'd already had to give up the idea of a virtuosic piano career. And in any case, he was married to Clara Schumann, who was she was 10 years younger, and she was a far better pianist than he was ever going to be.
Okay.
So he'd been composing for a long time, but he turned to he needed to do something popular. He needed a crowd pleaser.
Yes.
So that's why he wrote the Overture, Scherzo and Finale. He was used to, he had these two characters that sort of inhabited him, didn't he? There was the Florestan, there was the heroic Florestan, and there was the dreamy poet Eusebius. Yes. But there wasn't the jubilant character. Yes. And what he needed to be what he needed to be was jubilant, because he really needed to please the public.
Yes.
So this is why he wrote this, and he wrote it in 1841, which was actually the year he got married, and it didn't really go as well as he thought it might.
You mean in terms of receipts?
In terms of the critics.
Okay.
Of course, he always suffered from the same problem that Hugo Wolf suffered, and the same sort of mental disease that Hugo Wolf suffered from, is that if you spend a lot of time criticizing other people, they're not necessarily going to be on your side when they criticize you.
There you go.
And so we got sort of mediocre critics for this, and so he destroyed the last movement and rewrote it.
Okay.
Which made it better. But you can see in it that he wants to be jubilant the whole time, but it still gets rather wistful sometimes.
Good.
And
it's very romantic.
It is, of course, yes. Yeah.
We have a saying in journalism: never pick a fight with a guy who buys ink by the barrel.
Right. Okay. I'll remember that.
and please. And apparently writing music for money was quite common. I asked one time why Bach wrote so many concerti, and I was told he had 12 kids to support.
23 in the end.
23.
And
my goodness.
And he also had to write a cantata every week for the church in Leipzig, so for the St. Thomas Cathedral in Leipzig. So and that's why he recycled so much music, because you couldn't possibly do that if you had to rehearse it. But I mean, why? Of course, if you're a composer, if that's your profession, then of course you're writing for money as well.
That's right.
Because you do actually need to live, don't you?
You need to pay the rent.
And even if you've got a patron, then you still that patron will still, like Haydn and Beethoven, the Esterházys, that patron will still demand things of you. You are still, in essence, you are still writing for money, aren't you?
You mentioned the Esterházy family. Give us a little tutorial on them. They loom very large.
They actually come into quite a bit of what we're doing. They also have a link with Kodály. In the Galante, Beethoven knew Galante. Haydn knew Galante very well, because it was part of the Esterházy estate. And the Esterházys owned large estates in which is now Austria, Hungary, and a bit of Slovakia. A lot of that was Hungary before then, and they were great. Excuse me. They were great patrons of the arts, and they were great supporters of Beethoven, and they were great supporters, especially of Haydn, who worked for them for 20, 30 years.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the Dances of Galante will be your last piece, but let's skip ahead to that. Galante is a small town. There are only about 15,000 people there.
Kodály's father was the station master at the railway station. It was a changing point on the old train route from Vienna to Budapest. You went through Galante, and that's where Kodály spent much of his early childhood, and listening then to the Roma, to the gypsy bands that were there, and those melodies that the gypsy bands had were printed in about 1800 in Vienna, and Beethoven had a copy of them too.
Okay.
And there was Bihari, who was a very famous gypsy violinist. He knew Beethoven, and Beethoven knew him, and some of his works are influenced by Beethoven. And Beethoven and Schubert and Weber and Mozart and Haydn were all influenced by this Roma Hungarian culture.
And you get a lot of dances from the area.
You do a lot of dances from the area, and this one was a special dance. This one was called a Verbunkos, which was quite a common dance, but it was a recruitment dance.
Yes, you mentioned that in your film clip. Please elaborate on that.
They
Shanghaied people into the army.
Well, exactly. So you have this dance, and it's a recruitment dance. But the idea that all you have to do is to play a dance to some poor young recruit to get him to join the army is just a touch far-fetched. And although Kodály doesn't really allude to any program note in this, I think that it's really quite obvious what's going on in the dances. Is that basically you get to the tavern and where the dance is set up, and there are pretty girls there to act as sort of seductresses for this, and there's
the opiate of the men,
and there's a ton of alcohol certainly, and so you have this fatal mix. And what the music does really, really cleverly is it gets louder in a sense, but not louder in the sense of the volume, but it gets louder in the sense that it gets more complex, and that there are many little things like conversations rising in a crowded space. And at one point the music sort of suddenly stops dead, and again this is my own interpretation of this.
Okay.
I think this is at the point which our poor recruit actually drops unconscious from drink.
Okay.
And then there's this wonderful reprise of this haunting, melancholy beginning of the piece, and you can imagine him lying unconscious on the floor, dreaming of the girl he met earlier.
Yes.
And by the time he wakes up, he's been conscripted
Yes.
to fight for king and country.
And he's somewhere else.
And he's somewhere else. He's been shanghaied, as you say, press gang, dragged off somewhere.
Okay, let's go to Gabriela Lena Frank.
Yes.
Very interesting young lady, born in 1972 in Berkeley, California. In 1972 in Berkeley, California, I got my MBA from the University of California.
Did you know her then?
No, I was going to volunteer that. No, you're one step ahead of me, thank you. No, I never met her. But then again, I graduated in January. I don't know when she was born. But she wrote a very interesting piece that you will be performing, Leyendas, or Legends, and she writes of the music of the Andes. It's divided into 6 parts. 3 parts describe instruments, and 3 parts describe characters. Would you tell us about that?
So yeah, it's an utterly fascinating piece, and it spans, the 6 movements span an arc between, it starts off almost totally Andean, and ends up almost totally Spanish. And it's the idea that she had is that of miscegenation, of the mixing of 2 races, and the idea that neither race is subjugated to the other, that both have an equal say. And that's what makes it really, really fascinating. So we start off sort of the introduction is, as you say, the first 3 are instruments, and it just sort of introduces us to the Andean sound world.
Yes.
And then in the middle of the chasquis, in the middle of the Andean runners, this relay station that they had to get messages, it seems that they all suddenly burst out into a sort of Spanish song.
Yes.
while they're running through the Andes, and that one is just a fantastic mix of Andean melody and of Spanish classical music really. The big center movement of this is the big funeral procession, which is again, it's like a slow camera pan of a funeral, and at an Andean funeral you have professional mourners. You bring in professional mourners. So she writes this beautiful melody for the first professional mourner. And then there's a second professional mourner who isn't quite as good. Yes. And I'm not quite sure. I never got around to asking her whether this was a little piece of dark humor or not. Or whether the second mourner really wasn't quite as good. But anyway, it's obvious that there's a senior mourner,
yes,
and a junior mourner, and they sort of they follow one another then.
And you have to describe that musically
through this camera pan. And on top of that, you have the Catholic funeral rites, the plain chants. Yes. And what she does, which is so brilliant, is she puts them in completely separate registers. So that it's not a sort of Charles Ivesian, if you like, sort of mishmash, where everything sort of is together. That she separates it really, really carefully, so that you can, as listener, you can sort of swap, like looking at different parts of a picture. Mm-hmm. It would be, something like Christ in the Magi, or something like that, where you are drawn, like in a painting, especially sort of Bruegel and things like that, where you're drawn to very, very different parts of the painting, and he really draws you first to one bit and then to another bit, really, really manipulatively, if you like. That's what she does. She does the same thing. She has them, if you like, these things in two separate parts of the canvas, very separate parts of the canvas. So you can easily concentrate on either one or the other.
Okay, you spoke about the coro de mujeres, the choir of women, las lloronas, the crying women.
Yeah.
That's part 4. No, part 5.
Part 5, yeah.
Let's go back to 1, 2, and 3. Because what's interesting is if you've ever gone to Leadville, Colorado, which is at 11,000 feet, I went there and I had trouble breathing. These people who play these woodwinds are playing at 11,000, 12,000 feet elevation. And apparently it takes a lot of wind to play these things. Could you talk to that for us?
Yes, the tarka, the second movement especially, after the toyos, the tarka is yet another instrument which is blown so hard that it produces overtones. In Western music we often think of thirds, and in this it's fourths, so it's a slightly different tonality and things like that. And they require an awful lot of effort to play. But the wonderful thing is that how she actually brings those sounds alive just with stringed instruments. You would really somehow believe that we would have those instruments.
Didn't she compose that as a string quartet?
She composed it in 2001 as a string quartet, and then arranged it in 2008. She arranged it then for string orchestra.
So she did it.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, moving right along. We've done parts 1, 3, and 4. No, 1, 2, and 4. Let's do part 3. Beethoven. Am I correct?
Beethoven is the second piece, yeah?
Second piece, excuse me. And the human mind insists on forming patterns. And here's the pattern I get from Beethoven's operatic work. What you will be playing is a concert aria, a perfido, a perfidious one. He wrote an opera, Fidelio, the faithful one. Is there a pattern in there?
Beethoven was the ultimate humanist. He really was very, very serious about this sort of thing, about these themes of love and loss, about the themes of heroism, about the themes of selflessness. This was really this whole thing. He was himself a little bit of a loner, and of course with his increasing deafness, he became ever more isolated from the world. And he did despair about this, and he was suicidal about this, but he understood that he had something to give the world, and therefore he had to keep going. But the subjects that he alighted on are all, love and loss, heroism, selflessness in adversity, and all that sort of thing. And they were themes that were incredibly close to his heart. And the scratching out of Napoleon as devotee of the Eroica Symphony, because he crowned himself emperor, is a part of that humanism.
Let's elaborate on the history of that, because it's very, very interesting. This to me was the music of the times. It was the Eroica, the scrapping of it, the despair about it. It was the opera Tosca, La Tosca, about the Napoleonic era, the French Revolution. What was in Beethoven's mind when he scrapped the third?
I think that he felt, in a sort of true Enlightenment sense, that Napoleon, as savior, would come along and continue these Enlightenment ideas. And I think, so as with all dictators, the end product is always disappointment, isn't it? So, so up until then, he felt that here was a hope for the 19th century, and here was a hope for the continuation of these humanistic Enlightenment ideas, and then this massive disappointment,
Yes.
where sort of ego caught hold of Napoleon, well, not surprisingly really, and he crowned himself emperor, and you can imagine that there was like an idol falling, I suppose.
Yes.
Not an idol in the sense of the person, because I suspect that Napoleon was a problematic figure for Beethoven anyway, but an idol in the sense of what he represented, this continuation of Enlightenment.
You know, Napoleon
ideas.
used to cheat at chess.
Well, I mean, there you go. That puts him
Right there.
That's that. Yeah. Okay. How could one ever worship him again? Really. Yeah.
I look forward so much to, well, I'll be there on Sunday, to hearing you. And I want to thank you so very much for talking to us. And just as a coda, is there anything you would like to say to the people of Reno?
I have family in the valley, and I spend much of my summer here, and I'm really sort of fairly in love with the place. I'm really very, very happy to be here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Norm.